They call it the Island of the Forgotten. A place where the skyline of New York City glimmers in the distance, but inside its walls time stands still. Rikers Island isn't just a jail, it's a world within a world. A place where chaos rules, justice is delayed, and survival is the only law. Before we step inside this notorious fortress, hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truth behind America's darkest prisons. From the air, Rikers Island looks almost peaceful, a patch of land floating between Queens and the Bronx, surrounded by the East River's gray-blue water. But step beyond the fences and the illusion disappears. For decades, Rikers has been called one of the most violent jail complexes in the United States, a place where fear and tension never sleep. The island covers just over 400 acres, but it holds a population that once exceeded 10,000 inmates. Most of them aren't convicted criminals, they're people waiting for trial, unable to post bail, caught in the limbo between freedom and guilt. In that space, the line between justice and survival blurs quickly. The history of Rikers Island stretches back more than a century. In the early 1900s, the city purchased the island, then little more than a landfill filled with ashes and waste. By the 1930s, New York's growing jail population needed space, and Rikers became the answer, a remote, easily controlled site to confine the accused. But what was meant to be a short-term holding center soon evolved into a sprawling jail city, with multiple facilities, guard towers, bus routes, and its own grim economy of power, violence, and corruption. The journey to Rikers starts at a single bridge, the Rikers Island Bridge, the only access point connecting it to mainland Queens. Once you cross it, you're cut off from the rest of New York. For inmates, it's a one-way trip into uncertainty. For officers, it's a descent into one of the toughest work environments in the American justice system. Rikers isn't like a state or federal prison. It's chaotic, a revolving door of thousands of detainees moving in and out each year. Some stay only days, others years. And that constant turnover fuels instability. Correction officers, often understaffed and undertrained, are forced to manage hundreds of inmates at once. When tension rises, it explodes fast. Reports of beatings, gang attacks, and even deaths in custody have become all too common. The story of Rikers is also the story of neglect. Broken cells, failing air conditioning, filthy bathrooms, infestations, the kind of conditions that push human beings to the edge. Inmates describe it as a place where desperation eats away at sanity. And yet, somehow life goes on. Meals are served. Trials are delayed. Fights erupt. And somewhere between the chaos, people wait for a verdict, a release, or simply for the day to end. Over the years, the complex has grown into 9 major jails, each with its own reputation. Some are for men, others for women, and a few, like the Robert N. Davern Center, hold teenagers. For young inmates, Rikers can be especially brutal. The lack of separation between violent adults and vulnerable youths once made headlines after shocking investigations revealed patterns of abuse and cover-ups. By the 2010s, the world began to pay attention. Activists, journalists, and families of victims began exposing the reality inside: the suicides, the beatings, the medical neglect. The most haunting story of all was that of Kalief Browder, a Bronx teenager who spent 3 years in Rikers, 2 of them in solitary confinement, for a crime he never committed. His death, after release, became a symbol of a broken system that punishes poverty more than guilt. Rikers became a national conversation, not just about crime but about humanity. How much suffering should be tolerated in the name of justice? How long can a city keep defending a system that fails its own citizens? Even as reform programs are announced, new training for officers, better oversight, mental health initiatives, the cycle of violence continues. Some officers quit, others stay out of loyalty, and many inmates come back, trapped in the revolving door of poverty, addiction, and delayed justice. To this day, Rikers remains a reflection of America's contradictions, its desire for law and order clashing with its struggle for compassion. And while politicians promise closure by 2027, many New Yorkers doubt that day will come. Because shutting down Rikers isn't just about closing buildings, it's about confronting a culture built on decades of fear, neglect, and silence. In the heart of New York, a city known for ambition, art, and wealth, exists this other world. A place where dreams end before they begin. And as we move deeper into Rikers Island's story, we'll uncover what life is really like behind those gates, through the eyes of officers, inmates, and the families caught in between. The first thing most people notice when they arrive at Rikers isn't the sound of metal doors clanging shut, it's the smell. A mix of sweat, disinfectant, stale food, and fear. The air feels thick, heavy with tension, as if the walls themselves are alive with the memories of 1,000 violent nights. Every day inside Rikers begins with noise, boots echoing down narrow corridors, radios crackling, voices shouting commands. There's no gentle wake-up call. Inmates are jolted from sleep by the blare of morning counts and the rattling of chains. For newcomers, it's a shock. For veterans, it's just another day of surviving in what many call a war zone. Cells at Rikers are small, often barely big enough for 2 bunks and a toilet. Overcrowding means some inmates sleep on the floor, just inches from filth or vermin. Privacy doesn't exist here. Conversations, arguments, and cries of pain bounce endlessly off the concrete. Every sound reminds you that freedom is far away. Breakfast comes early. Trays of lukewarm food, often cold eggs, bread, and something resembling oatmeal, are passed through slots in the door. For many detainees, it's not the food that matters, it's the control. You eat when they say. You move when they say. Every moment is dictated by rules that feel designed to break you. Correction officers walk the tiers, watching closely but rarely speaking. Most have seen too much to care. They know a single wrong glance can trigger chaos. Tension inside Rikers is constant, like a storm waiting to break. Fights can start over anything: a word, a debt, a seat in the cafeteria. And when they do, they're fast, brutal, and often ignored until the shouting stops. Gang influence runs deep. Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, their presence defines the social order. New inmates learn quickly who controls what block, who you can talk to, and who you can't. Protection doesn't come free. Favors, loyalty, and violence are the currency of survival. Those who refuse to play along are often labeled food, easy targets for intimidation, theft, or assault. In theory, Rikers has strict rules against inmate violence. In reality, many fights go unreported. Some officers turn a blind eye, preferring not to get caught in the crossfire. Others use force themselves, beatings, chokeholds, or what's called the treatment, where inmates are taken to areas with no cameras and taught a painful lesson. Multiple investigations have documented these abuses, but accountability remains rare. Cameras fail, paperwork disappears, and stories contradict each other. Inside Rikers, truth bends easily to power. For those who can't handle the pressure, there's the Bing, solitary confinement. Officially called punitive segregation, it's a small concrete cell where inmates spend 23 hours a day alone. No conversation, no sunlight, no human touch. For some, it's a punishment worse than death. The silence eats away at their sanity. Mental health experts have long warned about the damage this causes, especially for young detainees. But overcrowding and staff shortages mean solitary is often used as a quick fix, to separate troublemakers or those with mental illness. Ironically, it only makes things worse. Beyond the violence and punishment, daily life at Rikers is defined by waiting. Waiting for court dates that never come. Waiting for visits that get canceled. Waiting for mail, medication, or a chance to shower. Time stretches endlessly, turning days into weeks and weeks into something unrecognizable. Many detainees lose track of time altogether, trapped in a system that seems to have forgotten them. Medical care is another battlefield. Rikers has a long history of neglect when it comes to health. Inmates with chronic conditions struggle to get medication. Others with mental illness are left untreated, their suffering mistaken for defiance. Suicide attempts are alarmingly frequent. And when tragedy strikes, official statements often describe it as an isolated incident. But those who live there know better. It's the pattern, not the exception. Still, amidst the chaos, small moments of humanity survive. A shared laugh between cellmates. A letter from a loved one. A brief call home. For some, the chapel or library becomes a refuge, the only place on the island where the noise fades and people can feel human again. Volunteers from outside the jail bring books, art supplies, and words of hope. Yet even they describe Rikers as a place heavy with despair, where hope struggles to breathe. For the officers, life is no easier. Many come from working-class families drawn by the steady paycheck. But the job takes a toll, mentally and physically. Constant danger, long hours, and little recognition wear them down. Some develop their own survival tactics: emotional numbness, dark humor, or the quiet resignation that nothing changes here. As the day ends, the noise returns, louder than ever. Inmates shout through vents and cell bars, trading stories, jokes, and threats. Somewhere, a radio plays faintly, the only sound that connects this world to the city just a few miles away. Lights dim, but sleep doesn't come easy. The fear of what might happen next keeps everyone awake. This is Rikers Island, a city within a city ruled by silence, violence, and the unending wait for justice. A place that doesn't just hold people, it consumes them. And as the night settles over the East River, the question lingers, how did America's largest jail become one of its darkest secrets? Before his name became a rallying cry for justice reform, Kalief Browder was just another kid from the Bronx, quiet, smart, and trying to stay out of trouble. Born in 1993, he grew up in a tight-knit family under difficult circumstances. His mother, Vanita Browder, worked hard to keep her children together and safe in a neighborhood where poverty and arrests were part of everyday life. But even her strength couldn't protect Kalief from what was waiting beyond their doorstep, a system that would fail him at every turn. In 2010, when Kalief was just 16, he was accused of stealing a backpack. The alleged victim claimed Kalief and his friend had taken it, a minor charge of robbery. But Kalief insisted from day one that he was innocent. He had no criminal record, no weapon, and no stolen items on him when police stopped him. Yet the officers arrested him anyway, and the moment they did, his life changed forever. Unable to pay the $3,000 bail, Kalief was sent to Rikers Island to await trial. What was supposed to be a temporary stay became a nightmare that lasted 3 long years. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of violence. 3 years of being forgotten by the very system that claimed to serve justice. From the start, Rikers was merciless. Kalief was small, quiet, and defiant in the one way that mattered. He refused to plead guilty to something he didn't do. That defiance made him a target. In a place where submission meant survival, Kalief's determination to prove his innocence marked him as trouble. Within weeks, he was beaten by other inmates, some affiliated with gangs, others just looking for a victim. Correction officers often stood by, sometimes even joining in. Video footage later surfaced showing him being slammed to the ground by guards, handcuffed, defenseless. Each assault chipped away at his body but never at his belief in the truth. When the fights didn't break him, isolation did. Kalief spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement. Alone for 23 hours a day, trapped in a small, dim cell the size of a bathroom. No human touch. No one to talk to. Just a slot in the door for food and a tiny window that showed nothing but sky. He later said that being in the box made him feel like he was dying slowly. Some nights, he screamed into the darkness, wondering if anyone even remembered he was there. Letters to his family were his only lifeline. His mother visited whenever she could, crossing the Rikers Island bridge again and again, only to see her son through a thick pane of glass. She pleaded with lawyers and judges, asking why her boy hadn't had a trial. The answer was always the same: delays, postponements, bureaucratic chaos. The system was clogged, overworked, and indifferent. Kalief's case was just another file in a stack gathering dust. After 3 years without a conviction, the charges were quietly dropped. There was no apology, no explanation, no justice, just a release form and a bus ride home. Kalief stepped off Rikers Island older, thinner, and haunted by memories no teenager should ever carry. Freedom didn't heal him. He tried to rebuild his life, returned to school, worked part-time, and even spoke out about prison reform. But the trauma followed him everywhere. He couldn't sleep, couldn't trust anyone, and felt constantly watched. The walls of Rikers had followed him home. In 2015, Kalief Browder took his own life. He was 22 years old. His death sent shockwaves across the nation. President Obama later cited his story when calling for the end of solitary confinement for juveniles in federal prisons. Documentaries, articles, and protests turned his name into a symbol, not of defeat but of exposure. His case revealed the rot inside the justice system, a place where poverty equals guilt and innocence doesn't guarantee freedom. Kalief's story forced America to look at Rikers Island differently. For decades, people dismissed it as just another violent jail. But now it had a face. A young man who had walked in innocent and never truly walked out whole. His death became a turning point, the beginning of widespread calls to close Rikers once and for all. Even years later, his name still echoes through the halls of reform movements. The city of New York announced its plan to shut down the jail by 2027, replacing it with smaller, borough-based facilities focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. But for many, that promise feels distant, and for families like the Browders, too late. Kalief's story is more than tragedy, it's a mirror. A reflection of what happens when justice turns into bureaucracy, when compassion gets lost behind concrete walls. His memory now stands as a silent protest against the cruelty that Rikers Island has come to represent. And yet, for every Kalief Browder whose story is told, there are hundreds of others still waiting, unseen, unheard, and forgotten, trapped in the same place that stole his youth. Rikers Island didn't kill Kalief directly, but it built the cage that crushed his spirit. And as his name became known across the country, one question remained: how many more will be lost before the island finally closes its gates forever? At Rikers Island, the line between order and chaos isn't drawn by walls or gates, it's drawn by power. And that power shifts constantly between two forces: the correction officers who try to control it and the gangs who rule from within. Both sides live in the same pressure cooker, both armed with authority, one official, the other earned through fear. Correction officers are supposed to maintain peace, but Rikers is no ordinary workplace. Every day they walk into a place where tension hums like an electric current. Most officers start young, drawn by steady pay and benefits. But once inside they discover a different world. One where survival often means bending the rules just to stay alive. Officers patrol cell blocks where hundreds of inmates outnumber them 10 to 1. Many describe it as walking into the lion's den. They wear body armor, carry radios, but deep down they know, when a fight breaks out, help might not come fast enough. It's not just about enforcing rules. It's about reading faces, spotting danger before it explodes, and knowing when to look away. Over time, fear and fatigue harden them. The constant threat of attack, the insults, the smell, the noise, it all chips away at empathy. Some become cynical, others angry. The uniform becomes armor not just against violence, but against emotion. Yet within that armor, corruption grows easily. There are stories whispered through the cell blocks about officers smuggling cigarettes, drugs, or phones in exchange for cash or loyalty. A few even align themselves with certain gangs, forming quiet alliances that keep the peace, at least for a while. The gangs provide control the system can't. And in return, officers look the other way when debts are settled or punishments handed out in the dark corners of the jail. It's a dangerous balance, one that can collapse at any moment. Inside Rikers, gangs aren't just groups. They're governments. The Bloods, Crips, Trinitarios, and Latin Kings run their own hierarchies with commanders, enforcers, and codes. Every dorm has its shot caller, the inmate who decides who eats, who sleeps where, and who pays the price for breaking internal rules. Even minor disputes can turn into bloodshed. One stolen phone, one insult, and chaos erupts. Officers often rely on gang leaders to maintain order. If you control the right people, one former officer said, you control the block. But that control comes with a cost. When a gang leader feels disrespected or transferred, violence follows. Retaliation can spread like wildfire. Ambushes in hallways, shanks made from toothbrushes, ambushed showers, and riots that start in seconds. To outsiders, Rikers might seem like a failure of management. But inside it's something worse, a culture of silent understanding. Everyone knows the rules of survival. Don't talk. Don't trust. Don't get caught in the middle. Even the Department of Corrections' own reports reveal how deep the problem runs. In 2014, federal investigators described Rikers as a deeply entrenched culture of violence. Their findings detailed routine beatings of inmates, falsified reports, and a code of silence that protected officers from accountability. Some guards formed what inmates called the program, a shadow system where selected inmates acted as enforcers for the officers, keeping others in line through intimidation and violence. When officers abuse their power, it rarely ends in justice. Complaints vanish in bureaucracy, and surveillance cameras conveniently fail during critical moments. Those who try to speak up, whether inmate or officer, often face retaliation. For many inside, silence isn't cowardice, it's survival. The corruption doesn't stop with violence. Smuggling contraband is one of Rikers' open secrets. Cell phones, drugs, tobacco, all of it flows in through back channels. Some officers risk everything for quick cash. Others are blackmailed or coerced. Once you're involved, there's no easy way out. The island remembers, and its debts are always paid, one way or another. But it's not all cruelty. Some officers genuinely care. They try to mentor young inmates, intervene in fights, or simply listen, small acts that go unnoticed in the headlines. Yet even they admit that hope is scarce. The environment changes people. Good intentions erode under the weight of despair. For inmates, the guards represent both danger and protection. They are the ones who can save your life, or destroy it. A wrong word, a challenge, or even a glance can mean the difference between being fed or being left in isolation. And when chaos breaks out, there's no guarantee anyone will come to help. This toxic cycle feeds itself. The more violent Rikers becomes, the more aggressive officers must be. The more aggressive they become, the more resentment and defiance grow among inmates. It's a loop that no amount of training seems able to break. The city's oversight agencies have tried to intervene, installing more cameras, pushing for better mental health programs and prosecuting corrupt officers. Yet the problems persist. Because the true rot isn't in the buildings, it's in the culture. A culture where fear equals control and control equals survival. Rikers Island has always been described as temporary, a holding place before trial, before conviction. But for the people inside, every day feels like a sentence. Officers serve their shifts like inmates serve their time, trapped in the same cage just wearing different colors. And as night falls over the East River, the lights of New York City flicker in the distance, untouchable and bright. From Rikers, the skyline looks like another world, one that promises order, fairness, and freedom. But on the island, the only law that matters is the one written in blood and silence. When people think of Rikers Island, they often picture hardened male inmates, gang leaders, repeat offenders, violent criminals. But hidden among the sprawling complex lies a smaller, quieter facility that tells another story. It's the women's jail, a place where pain takes a different form. Where survival isn't just about physical strength, but about holding on to humanity in a system that seems determined to strip it away. The Rose M. Singer Center, known to inmates and officers simply as Rosie, is Rikers Island's women's facility. From the outside, it looks like any other jail, gray walls, razor wire, and narrow windows that barely let in light. But inside, it holds hundreds of women, most of them pretrial detainees, mothers, daughters, and victims long before they were ever labeled criminals. Many of these women are not dangerous in the traditional sense. Their crimes range from drug possession and shoplifting to survival-based offenses like prostitution or theft to feed their children. But once they enter Rikers, they face the same brutality and neglect as the men, sometimes worse. Because here, vulnerability is weakness and weakness is exploited. At Rosie, the atmosphere is tense, unpredictable, and deeply emotional. Fights can erupt at any time, often over small things. A seat in the cafeteria, a borrowed item, a harsh word. The officers, mostly men, patrol with an authority that hovers between control and intimidation. There are stories of female inmates being harassed, manipulated, or even assaulted by staff, crimes that rarely make it beyond the island's walls. Complaints vanish into paperwork. The victims, terrified of retaliation, often stay silent. Many of these women come to Rikers already carrying heavy trauma, from abusive relationships, addiction, homelessness, or the loss of their children. Once inside, the system offers little healing. Instead, it deepens their wounds. Therapy sessions are rare, counselors are overworked, and the few programs meant for rehabilitation are constantly underfunded. For pregnant inmates, the experience is especially cruel. There have been reports of women giving birth in cells or being handcuffed during labor. One woman recalled screaming for help for hours before anyone came, her child born on the cold floor of a jail cell. Motherhood doesn't end at the gate. Many detainees are mothers separated from their kids for months, sometimes years, as their cases drag on. Phone calls are expensive. Visits are brief. The pain of missing birthdays and milestones cuts deeper than any punishment. Some women cling to drawings and letters from their children, the only reminders of the life waiting beyond the razor wire. Still, in the darkest corners of Rikers, moments of solidarity shine through. Women form small families, jail sisters who protect each other, share food, or simply talk through the long nights. They braid each other's hair, trade stories, and dream of freedom. These bonds are fragile but powerful. Tiny acts of rebellion against a system that wants them broken and silent. The guards, too, live complicated lives. Some are kind and protective, others cruel and jaded. Female officers often describe the job as a war zone, one where they face danger not just from inmates but from their own colleagues. Many report sexual harassment from within their ranks, their complaints ignored or dismissed. In this sense, Rosie traps everyone inside, both inmates and staff, in an environment built on fear, distrust, and silence. In recent years, reformers have tried to shed light on these hidden realities. Reports by watchdog groups exposed widespread abuse, medical neglect, and a pattern of retaliation against those who speak out. Advocates have called for closing the women's jail entirely, arguing that incarceration only deepens the cycle of trauma and poverty that brought many women there in the first place. The city has promised to replace Rikers with smaller, community-based facilities by 2027, but few believe those promises will erase decades of suffering. For the women inside Rosie, time moves differently. Days blur into weeks, and hope fades like the distant city skyline outside their barred windows. And yet, in the face of it all, they endure. They sing, they pray, they write letters, and they wait. Some find faith. Others find strength in each other. Because in a place built to erase identity, survival becomes an act of defiance. When the lights dim and the noise settles, the silence of the Rose M. Singer Center carries echoes of heartbreak and resilience. Behind those walls are women who the world has forgotten, but who refuse to forget themselves. For them, freedom isn't just about walking out of Rikers. It's about reclaiming dignity in a world that treated them as invisible. And that may be the hardest sentence of all. Behind every locked cell at Rikers Island is a story, but some of the most painful ones are never told. They belong to the men and women trapped not only by bars and fences, but by their own minds. The mental health crisis at Rikers is one of its darkest, least visible realities, a humanitarian disaster hiding in plain sight. It's estimated that nearly half of all people incarcerated on Rikers Island suffer from some form of mental illness. Depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, conditions that need treatment, not punishment. But in the chaos of the jail, mental health is often mistaken for defiance. A breakdown becomes misbehavior. A panic attack becomes non-compliance. And too often the response is isolation. For decades, Rikers has used solitary confinement as its primary solution to control those it can't understand. They call it punitive segregation. Inmates call it the box. A space barely larger than a closet with a steel bed, a toilet, and a small window that barely lets in light. 23 hours a day inside, 1 hour outside in a caged area that looks more like a dog run than a yard. The silence is suffocating. The isolation breaks even the strongest minds. Many arrive at Rikers already fragile. Homeless individuals cycling through the streets and hospitals of New York, veterans haunted by trauma, addicts desperate for help. But instead of treatment centers, they're funneled into cells. Once inside, their conditions worsen. Some stop eating. Some stop talking. Some lose all sense of time. The officers aren't trained to deal with psychiatric crises. They're trained to control. When an inmate screams, they respond with force. When one refuses to move, they use pepper spray. When someone harms themselves, medical help can take too long to arrive. The reports are filled with phrases like inmate unresponsive or incident under investigation, words that hide years of neglect behind sterile language. There are units at Rikers meant for mental health care, observational housing, PACE units, and clinical alternatives to punitive segregation. On paper they sound humane. In practice they are often overcrowded, understaffed, and poorly supervised. Psychiatrists and counselors rotate in and out, overwhelmed by caseloads that would be unthinkable anywhere else. Many of them describe the work as emergency medicine inside a slow-motion disaster. Suicide is the most devastating symptom of this crisis. In recent years, Rikers has seen a sharp rise in suicides and suicide attempts. Some detainees hang themselves with bedsheets or clothing. Others overdose on smuggled drugs. There are cases where inmates cried for help, warning staff they were suicidal, only to be found dead hours later, ignored or forgotten. The pattern is painfully familiar. Understaffed housing units, broken cameras, falsified records, and exhausted officers who fail to check cells on schedule. Each death is labeled an anomaly. But inside, everyone knows it isn't. It's the system functioning exactly as it always has, cold, indifferent, and overwhelmed. Solitary confinement amplifies this tragedy. Psychologists have compared it to torture, and the science agrees. Prolonged isolation causes hallucinations, paranoia, depression, and irreversible trauma. Even after release, the effects linger. Former inmates describe hearing phantom noises, fearing sunlight, or being unable to sleep without walls around them. The human mind, when deprived of connection, begins to eat itself. Kalief Browder's case exposed this horror to the public, but he was far from the only one. Dozens have followed the same path, arrested for minor offenses, thrown into isolation, and broken by the silence. In 2021, 24-year-old Brandon Rodriguez died by suicide just days after arriving at Rikers. His family said he begged for help. He was placed in isolation instead. A year later, another detainee, Elijah Muhammad, was found dead after being left unsupervised for hours. Each new death reignited outrage, and yet, the cycle continued. Inmates who survive solitary rarely come out the same. Some emerge angry and volatile. Others quiet, withdrawn, almost ghost-like. The jail calls it stabilization. In truth, it's emotional decay, the slow erasure of identity. The tragedy extends beyond the walls. Correction officers suffer too. Many develop PTSD from daily exposure to violence and suicide. Some describe nightmares, flashbacks, and panic attacks. Yet few receive psychological support. It's a crisis that consumes both sides, those in uniform and those in orange. Over the years, reformers have demanded change. Lawsuits have forced the city to reduce solitary confinement for juveniles and mentally ill detainees. New York officials announced plans to replace isolation with therapeutic housing units, focused on treatment and de-escalation. But progress moves slowly on the island. Culture resists change and neglect hides easily behind bureaucracy. For now, Rikers remains what it has always been, a place where the sick are punished instead of healed. Where silence replaces compassion. Where every locked door is another failure of a system that confuses justice with containment. In the distance, the city glows, filled with hospitals, therapists, and shelters that could have helped long before the handcuffs ever closed. But on Rikers Island, those lights might as well be stars, visible but unreachable. Because here, at the heart of America's justice system, the greatest punishment isn't the loss of freedom. It's being forgotten. Rikers Island stands as a monument to everything broken about American incarceration. Built on waste, fed by neglect, and ruled by silence, it's more than just a jail, it's a symbol. A symbol of how poverty becomes criminal, how justice moves slowly, and how suffering becomes invisible when it's hidden behind concrete. The city promises that Rikers will close by 2027. But many wonder, will closing the island end the problem, or just move it somewhere else? Because the truth is, Rikers isn't just a place. It's a mindset. One that values punishment over humanity. And until that changes, the spirit of Rikers will live on, in every overcrowded cell, every forgotten inmate, every broken promise. As the sun rises over the East River, the island looks almost peaceful again. The skyline sparkles just beyond reach. But inside those walls, thousands still wait, for justice, for freedom, for someone to remember their names. If this story moved you, help us keep telling the truth about places the world would rather forget. Like, share, and subscribe, because the more people who know, the harder it becomes to look away. And remember, justice means nothing if it can't be found on the island of the forgotten.